Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from nearly half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponari of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigmont of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. We also offer a weekly email newsletter which includes show notes for each episode. Learn more at commandcontrolpower.com. And thanks for listening. This episode of Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free and is made possible by our Patreon sponsors. You can help bring more commercial-free episodes by going to patreon.com/CMDCTRLPWR and supporting the show with a monthly pledge. Thank you for your support of Command Control Power. We'd like to welcome back to the show a very special guest, Adam Engst of TidBITS Content Network. Thanks for being back with us, Adam.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's always great to talk to you. Always very informative. I think I remember, a very meaningful show we had you on was right at the beginning of COVID, and I think we did a check-in a little while thereafter. I don't think that's a big focus for our show today, but any kind of quick thoughts about that, about where we stand in this pandemic/endemic virus that we're in the middle of?
Yeah, boy, it's a topic we don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think the thing that's being the most interesting for certainly Apple users and thus for consultants and professionals who are recommending stuff is the supply chain stuff.
Yeah.
That, boy, if you want Apple things, you want to think about ordering sooner rather than later. iPads, Apple Watches, even the iPhones are going to be starting to be an issue. I saw something about how Apple's cutting iPad production to redirect chips to the iPhone 13. So, you just do not assume you can get something overnight.
Yeah. That's really true. Yeah, I mean, and it's still blamed on the pandemic. I think the pandemic really put some strain on an already stressed system, or just basically a system like most of our systems in the modern world, not to get on my soapbox, but one that doesn't have a whole lot of slack built in and not a lot of safe failure modes and redundancies and things. So you end up where, like, if, suddenly we have a congestion in the container ship arena, it just kind of
the
like
Suez Canal specifically.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was like kind of like unbelievable. Like that happened.
The word that I've been hearing a lot is resilience. I think and this was a little bit of a, it was kind of a business thing, right? That businesses in particularly like the 90s and early 2000s, it was this big deal to do like just-in-time inventory and everything. And it's really efficient until it breaks.
Yeah, exactly. I've been beating that drum for a while about just-in-time delivery of critical infrastructure, critical PPE and things like that is a really bad idea. And it's kind of crazy that was the status quo for so long. If you need, a certain number of Band-Aids, you just like expect to be able to get them. Well, we need 1 million Band-Aids. Like, they'll be here in a week. They're manufactured many, many, many thousands of miles away.
And then I will say the one other thing, which is, again, pandemic related, which I find truly fascinating, and again, I think speaks to a lot of the issues that Apple professionals are running into, is employment. That we're seeing people wanting to hire and not being able to find employees.
Big time.
Big time. Sure. The very blunt explanation has been, the unemployment payments. But it turns out the stats really don't support that. That literally they've done studies because some of the states stopped the checks before other states. And so they were able to see what percentage of people were looking for work in the states that had stopped versus states that haven't. Turns out it was 4% difference. So that was not it. And the research that I'm seeing now suggests that it's really about the experiences that people went through. And sort of the analogy that's being made is people who went through the Great Depression in the 1920s never, ever invested in the stock market again.
Wow.
Because they had experienced it and it had molded them in a certain way. It really wasn't until the 50s and 60s that stock investing became a thing again. And it was a whole new generation. And so the argument is that people have gone through the first year of this pandemic, discovered things about employment that they didn't know before. Maybe they weren't, some of it's just not earning enough, right? Everyone has a price in some regards, but a lot of it was also like, this isn't how I want my life to be, or this job sucks. I'm not.
Yeah.
And so bigger cycle that I've been working through in my head is that we put a great deal of emphasis on efficiency and, lowering cost to consumers and everything, but we don't think about the quality of the other side of the production cycle, basically of the people who are doing the work. We see them as consumers when they come out the other side,
Right.
but we don't see them as like, well, gee, maybe if their jobs didn't suck so much, they'd be more enthused about doing them.
Right.
And so, again, one of the things I'm just sort of theorizing and thinking about these days, it's not even really like a core thing that I would write about in TidBITS or TidBITS Content Network stuff, is just that I think employers need to think about making jobs better.
Quality of life is just as important. It's related to salary, it's related to compensation, but quality of life is a separate thing too. Like, how many vacation days do you get? How nice of a work environment is it? How considerate?
How much fun do you have?
Right.
I like what I do. I enjoy my work. Yeah, it's not a problem to do it. But boy, if you dread the whole Monday thing, if you dread going to work.
Well, I think as employers, we can think about what are the reasons that someone might leave, like what are the things about the job that do suck, and how can we make those things go away? How can we take care of those things, otherwise like route around those issues that make somebody's life worse, by coming to work. How can we make things better? Just like we try to make things better for our clients. Like, why shouldn't we do that for our employees?
Precisely. It's the same kind of problem solving. I'm sitting here like, I need to send statements to my authors about what they've written every month. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this manually. So I sat down and, worked Keyboard Maestro for 15 minutes to automate it. Right. But that's one of those things. Like, if I had an employee who I was like, go do this stupid task every month, that makes their life more miserable. Whereas if I was like, okay, I see you're doing this stupid task, let's work together to make that stupid task into a 30-second press a key automation, then suddenly everyone's happier.
Right. And you can anticipate that, or maybe get the feedback, or ask them, what about the jobs you do every week, suck, and how can I help? Oh, you know what? Let me show you Keyboard Maestro. Let's do 30 minutes training session. They get some FaceTime with the boss. They enjoy that. They learn a new skill, and they find many more ways where it can help them in their day-to-day work.
And they can take it out to customers.
Right, exactly. So, it's all around better for everybody. But the alternative is kind of like the nature of our society, which is like we just externalize all costs, and pretend that they don't exist. This job sucks. I'm going to give it to someone else to do, and then I'm going to forget about it.
Yeah, right.
And and I'm like, consequences be damned. If their life gets worse, well, it sucks to be them. That's just a terrible attitude, And I think that's the way we look at a lot of things. Like, oh, there's pollution. Well, put it in someone else's backyard. And I don't have to think about it.
Yeah. So okay. Done. We're done. No more pandemics.
Problems solved. Yeah.
We solved all the problems. We're good.
But you're right about the whole supply chain issues, because we went months and months without, new Macs, like waiting for, new hardware to be able to recommend to certain clients. Like we've had people waiting for a new 16-inch MacBook Pro for a long time, or, higher capacity on the current generation hardware. And we finally got that, but this stuff is now taking weeks to ship. And I think a lot of clients don't realize that. They're used to ordering from Apple and having it be there like it's in the store now, or it's like on the way and it'll be there in a week or less. And, it's not like that. And it hasn't been like that in a while. So it's something I think to set their expectations, because when they drag their feet, that's only adding to that timeline. And I think a lot of clients need that little nudge saying like, you better get in line now if you want to have this project wrapped up by the end of the year at this point.
We're also seeing some customers that are, normally looking to place orders online. And of course, we're seeing that delay, but some of the stores are getting an onslaught of people that are going for their inventory. Even if it's not the exact model that they wanted, they're finding in-store inventory and coming in and grabbing them because the delays are just tremendous online.
Wow.
I did notice, I haven't looked back at it, but that first day or two, I was looking at the delays on different configurations. And it was pretty clear that Apple had some that were pre-built and some that weren't. Some you were going to get in the next week, some you were going to get in December. That was the first day. A lot of it had to do with the chips, whether the M1 Max was not shipping as fast overall. So, who knows, maybe it's a lower yield situation, who knows, but there were definitely differences. And so what Sam was saying, I think it's absolutely the case that some people are willing to make trade-offs on the specific config. But also, something I know we need to talk about is like, who knows what the configs you should get are.
Yeah, that was a tough
Yep.
one. Jerry and I got on the phone and got on message thread and watching the keynote together and talking about it. I'm not sure where Sam was. He was probably with a client
You're
or
just
something.
excluding me again.
So we were
I'm used to
just,
it by now.
we're like hashing it out like, oh, this is all really exciting. Let's look at all these configs and just starting to go through it. It was the same process you're describing, like which one do I need? I mean, let alone making the decision for a client, but like I'm very happy on a MacBook Pro with an M1. Now it's about a year old. It came out last October, right? So
the 13-inch,
the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. It's a great machine. I was absolutely blown away by the battery life. Still am. Talk about it all the time. Performance is not an issue whatsoever for me. Maybe certain aspects of my workflow, maybe if I were doing more things like video editing or something, I might want more capable hardware, but I haven't needed it for that reason. What I've wanted is a larger screen. And I'm not even sure I would want to carry, though, the 16-inch versus this 13 because it's just it's like a pound and a half heavier or something like that.
The 16 is beefy. It's what is it? Gosh, I want to say one of them is 3.5, but I'm forgetting which one it is.
No, I think
the 14
is
just
16.
3.5.
Yeah, exactly. I think the 16 is like a full pound, heavier than that. So,
right.
And this is the 13 MacBook Pro. I mean, I could probably even downgrade to a MacBook Air for that matter next time around.
I have the M1 MacBook Air without the chip binned one, so 8 GPU. Same thought, I have no need for any more performance than this.
I wonder about any kind of performance throttling from heat dissipation. If you have a slightly hotter environment, or I've noticed in my travels working in the sun, sometimes it actually gets warmer. So that's my only concern about the current MacBook Air with no fan. I thought the MacBook Pro is kind of a good hedge for that. And I'm very happy with it. But yeah, Jerry and I are going through these configurations, making these decisions, trying to spec it out for ourselves. Apple has a great compare page on their website where you can line up several different models and compare the specs, item for item. And one of the specs I looked at first was the battery. The battery life in the new 14-inch is significantly less. I mean, it's a few hours less, depending on the task you're doing, than my 13-inch MacBook Pro. That's going to be a downgrade for me. That helped me really make the decision not to spend a bunch of money just to get a slightly bigger screen, slightly heavier computer, more performance, which I didn't ask for, So that was kind of where what it came down to for me. And I think, Jerry, did you make a similar decision when we were going through that?
Well, the interesting thing is that we were both talking to each other and we were ready to buy. Yeah. And we're putting up different SKUs. And it seems to me like there's a lot of different possible configurations you can come up with, depending on what you want. Like you said, Adam, what to buy. But at the same time, Joe said, that trade-off of battery life is hugely important. Now, several weeks later, we're hearing reports of people getting these MacBook Pros that they ordered and saying for the stuff I do, I really didn't notice a difference.
Yeah. So, here's the thing that I've been hearing. Just to be clear, we have the M1, the M1 Pro, and the M1 Max. From things I'm hearing, the M1 Max is really either video or stuff where you're going to be hammering the GPU. Mm-hmm. And the video is because it has more video encode processors, video cores, and an extra ProRes core. So it's just going to be better at video. The M1 Max is going to be better at video than the M1 Pro, and obviously than the M1. The M1 Pro, you're talking 8 or 10 core CPU, and more GPUs, 16, 24, or 32 GPUs, so that you'll get much more GPU than the M1. My take right now is that unless you're doing video, don't bother going past the M1 Pro.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
The same thing kind of applies to RAM. The 64 gigabytes, whoa, that's a lot of RAM. But when you combine the fact that it's 64 gigabytes with the incredible memory bandwidth that they added and the unified memory, my suspicion is that you have to be utterly hammering a workflow to be needing that.
Yeah,
I would agree. Yeah.
So even 32 is probably overkill for most things. 16 feels like a good amount to me.
Yeah.
And that was the thing when the first round came out, it was like 16 gig max. Everyone's throwing their hands up and screaming bloody murder. But in most situations, people wouldn't need more than that with the unified memory. So,
and the faster SSDs. That's the other thing is that even if you're swapping, they said that the SSDs were twice as fast as before.
Yeah, that's insane.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're starting to get to the point where SSD, I mean, it's going to be slower than the memory, obviously, but it's so much less of a hit that it may be not such a big deal.
Yeah, if you
So
need that kind of memory to, to load files that you're working on,
yeah,
to, run some kind of like automated workflows to like process images or process video and things like that, maybe you do benefit from having like that huge amount of memory so that those tasks can kind of like stay on chip. If you're just like opening apps and you need to like multitask and like switch to a different app and it's paging to the drive and back, like you said with the SSD, it's pretty fast. You're not really going to notice that, there's like a slight delay to open an app when you just need to page out to the SSD. So yeah, I've been telling people that as well with the limit of 16 gigs, but also even considering the specs of the new machines, they seem to be more economical with memory. I'm not sure what the right term is for that, but essentially like they don't, they're just different with the way that they use memory compared to Intel machines.
The unified memory, again, I gather there's like YouTube videos you can watch where people will try to benchmark this stuff, but I haven't yet seen anything from someone who I consider to be a real chip guru. Unified memory, because it's allowing the CPU and the GPU to act on the same data without moving it around. Because that's before you had to be shuffling it off to, like GPU was a separate thing with its own memory, and you were actually shuffling data over there and then back again.
Right.
That is an entirely different situation. And again, with this 200 or 400, I can't believe this, 200 or 400 gigabytes per second bandwidth. Like 400 gigabytes per second. I almost can't imagine that.
It's unfathomable.
Yeah, right? It was like, so that means you could copy my entire 1 terabyte drive through memory anyway in 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds. But once you combine that, if you're completing the operations, it doesn't matter if you don't have as much memory. Like you're just moving on to the next thing so much more quickly. It is truly interesting to contemplate, and that's why I'm dying to see, as people get these machines into particular kinds of workflows, to say, oh yeah, here's what I do that really makes a difference.
And that's the question. Like, Joe, you have the same model that I do, and you were thinking of buying a new one, whereas I was thinking I don't necessarily need it because the performance of my current M1 is doing me just fine. With the exception of an occasional need for a restart every couple of weeks or something like that, if I haven't done it, I notice a slowdown, and I think you mentioned the same thing. So given the reduction in battery life, which I see as 20 hours to 17 hours, let's say, from the 13-inch to the 14, are you still considering jumping on this one and moving forward with it?
I'm really kind of just in a holding pattern to wait and see what people say, the early adopters. And I kind of think there's not much they could say that would convince me. It's more just like a workflow thing. When I was working mostly from coffee shops and remotely and things, a bigger screen was helpful. I had a 15-inch screen before this. But obviously now I'm mostly at my desk. I have a bigger screen on my desk mounted on an arm I can use, it really effectively to do remote support, put some multiple client windows up there and do my thing on my built-in screen. And the 13-inch is fine for that purpose. And I think you and Jerry both said to me at one point, like, I just do everything on my 13-inch screen. It's fine. And I was really surprised. I used to have a 15-inch. I thought that was a little cramped to deal with a client, remotely on a 27-inch iMac, say. But these days, I agree with you guys. I think it's been really effective just to work on the built-in screen when I need to. And if I have the big monitor attached, it's great. I don't know if there'd be a huge benefit to like improving my kind of remote workflow to go to a 14-inch screen, or let alone a 16-inch screen. But of course, the trade-off with that is, yes, I have better flexibility when I am remote. I have a nice big 16-inch screen, let's say, but I'm carrying around like 2 more pounds.
It's 3 pounds versus 4.7.
Yeah. So it's another like 1.7 pounds. That is a lot. And even going to the 14-inch, it's another half pound compared to my 13-inch. So, and I could probably downsize to MacBook Air and mostly be fine and save even more weight. So I'm not so sure that either the 14 or the 16 would be really worth it. I was leaning toward the 14, if anything. I love the fact that you can get all the same specs in the 14 as the 16. You don't have to go with the big honking machine to get, the best processor or the most memory or anything like that. So it's nice to have the 14-inch be an option. The rest of it is really just a nice to have, like the Liquid Retina XDR display. Cool, but I like my Retina display. It's fine. I don't know if I would really benefit. The 14-inch and 16-inch are brighter screens, which is cool. Not necessary. And the ProMotion display is probably going to be a nice to have. I think it's going to be really nice. I haven't seen it yet in the iPhone, but I think that would be probably where I would really appreciate it much more, especially for the battery life savings. But I'm not so sure that I need that on my Mac.
Yeah, I have an iPhone 13 Pro, and I honestly haven't noticed it. I mean, like the screen's gorgeous, but the screen of my iPhone 11 Pro was gorgeous too. Maybe it's better. I don't know. Exactly. The one thing I will say that I think the new MacBook Pros have going over, everything but the 2020 iMac is a 1080p FaceTime HD camera. It's still weak. I mean, compared to what we've got in iPhones and iPads, it's weak, but nonetheless, it's better than the 721 that we have in the MacBook Pro 13 and the MacBook Air.
But how much better? Because I mean, coming from every prior Mac prior to the M1s, any of the M1s, basically, the cameras were terrible. They were always a 720p camera. The M1 Max didn't change the resolution, but they did add much better signal processing. So my front-facing video on my Mac is way better, even though the camera is like quote unquote the same specs. I get a much better quality image, and you can see it compared with other people's video. When you're looking at on both sides. So,
well, I mean, one of the things that comes up, and I actually am kind of pondering this topic for an possible article too, which is these are the MacBook Pros. But, it really seems that Apple has some very specific professionals in mind. That if you're not doing high-end audio, video, or photography, these aren't for you. It's like they're just overkill.
Yeah.
They're not helping you in ways they might. So one of the things I've been pondering is, well, what do other kinds of professionals want to see from Apple? Because I'm the kind of guy who always had the Mac Pro back when they're the cheese grater ones and things like that. Back when have two monitors, for instance, you needed a Pro. Slowly, Apple sort of built all of those kind of professional features into the consumer levels, and I'm very happy with the 27-inch iMac for the most part. But it does feel as though, hey, I'm a professional too. The fact that I'm a writer doesn't mean that I don't need stuff. I just don't need massive processing.
Right. Well, I mean, what would your ideal machine be? Because I'm sitting here as you're saying this, imagining like a 15-inch MacBook Air for me. Thin and light. Plenty of battery life, but a nice big screen.
So for people who, I'm not a mobile guy. I'm a desktop guy. So, for instance, one of the things is, can you believe that we have iMacs that only
top out at 2 terabytes?
Well, not so much that, but okay. They don't adjust. Here's another one, which is I have a Thunderbolt display sitting next to my 27-inch iMac because it's the only monitor I can get that's actually the same form factor and size and everything. Apple doesn't do a Retina external display. But, my Thunderbolt display has to sit on a book to get it to be the same height as my iMac because no Apple desktop machines have ever been height adjustable.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Why do we have to put these things on books to get them to the right height? You want to talk about something which doesn't look professional, and is not designed. So, that's one of those things that gets me. Again, not having a standalone Retina display that you can hook to that 13-inch MacBook Pro and have a really high quality one. There's one 5K Retina display available in the world, the LG Ultrafine 5K, and it's a little funky and a little expensive. Why isn't Apple solving that hole in the universe at this point?
Adam, you say that it's not professional to have your monitor on books, but it depends on the kind of books that you have it stacked on. So
yeah, well, mine's sitting on one of my books, the AT&T WorldNet Web Discovery Guide from 1996. So so mine's actually professional, but precisely. You can do it. It's just that's the kind of hacks that we're being forced to deal with because Macs are not very ergonomic. Another one, here's one for you guys might switch back and forth. I think that the center-mounted trackpad with the keyboard in front of it works really, really well on MacBooks. Always have. I think it's a great system. Try doing that on a desktop. You can't do it. It is not possible to put a Magic trackpad in front of a Magic keyboard. They don't work that way. And so you're always off to the side, which, again, it's not like the end of the world, but it's not the same thing. And so if you go back and forth between a desktop Mac and a laptop Mac, you're suddenly having to do two completely different ergonomic setups for how you interact with the keyboard and pointing device.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that was tough for me when I used to use a desktop, for everything. Switching to a laptop, like you're describing, the different kind of form factor and even just the workflow of a trackpad versus a mouse, it was a lot to get used to. Like my answer for most clients is just use a mouse. Is that not ergonomic to kind of have the mouse off to the side? I feel like, of course,
not. Mice are actually kind of terrible. Part of the reason is that the weight of your hand is you're pushing down. It's better, obviously, since we have optical mice these days. I mean, I go back to the old roller mice, but you're still pushing down. The weight of your hand is pushing against the effort of moving to left and right. And it's always one hand, and it's always off to the side, so you're bouncing back and forth to your keyboard. I actually use this weird thing called a Contour Designs roller mouse, which is a roller bar. So it rolls for vertical orientation and it slides left, right for horizontal, and you can combine the two for full motion. And that sits right in front of my keyboard. So it's right in front of my space bar. I can mouse without just moving my hand the same amount you move it on a MacBook with a trackpad.
I want a link.
You want a link? Contour Designs roller mouse. Google it. It's really easy. Yeah. Good device. I mean, they sell it for ergonomics. It's people who have tendonitis problems, RSI problems. That's how I got started with it many, many years ago. I've had these things for decades. They're kind of cool. I mean, they're weird. Don't get me wrong. You have to learn it a bit. Once you've done it, as long as you're not doing really, really fine work, like I wouldn't recommend one to a graphic designer who does pixel level stuff. But for normal use, it's great. And it's very easy on the hands. So again, for someone who's typing all day. Here's one for you guys who are laptop stuff. Does it bug you that the front edge of every MacBook is sharp?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those of us who type and our hands are always there. Yeah. It's like they get creases on my hands, So remember the old white and black plastic MacBooks? Nice curvy edges.
Yeah.
Those were soft. So this is the kind of thing where I was like, you want to make a Mac that meets the needs of different kinds of professionals. There's different constraints. And I'm not saying Apple shouldn't be doing the mega cool M1 Macs, loaded to the gills chips. But there are other people who have constraints that are just different things. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that from Apple as they move forward. Because I don't think these stuff needs to be mutually exclusive.
Before we get to the all-important topic of the new Apple polishing cloth,
speaking of supply chain constraints,
to linger on kind of like where we would spec these machines for clients. I guess my list was clients waiting for current hardware with more storage. I mean, that's I think a really good fit for these machines if you can tolerate the slightly larger size of the 14 versus the 13. It's the way you get more storage if you need more storage. And I do have a few clients who need that. It's pretty ample in the M1 generation. 2 terabytes is the max across the board, I think, there with the iMac and the M1 Pro and Air. But yes, clients that are kind of approaching the 2 terabyte size and need the 4 terabyte, that's one of the few cases where this is appropriate. And the other ones are the clients that just, really do want the bigger screen and don't mind carrying it. That's about it. And I don't have too many clients that are in this kind of professional realm where they do really need the raw processing power of these new machines. But of course, I'm glad Apple's doing it. And I can only imagine what a future iMac processor will be and future iMac Pro potentially, and let alone an eventual Mac Pro. I mean, that's going to be kind of off the charts insane as far as performance goes.
Do you think that they've overextended their reach maybe with these machines? Do you think it's all anecdotal, but we're hearing of people getting them and saying, yeah, this cost me thousands of dollars more and I really don't need it because I'm not seeing the difference between my M1. I mean, the original M1 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro, bona fide hits. And maybe this new wave of computers, the MacBook Pros, are just a little too niche. And maybe the sales figures won't hold up long term. I'm wondering if they dial it back at some point.
Right, you're suggesting that maybe we need the 14 and 16 with an M1, just an M1. Because you can get the bigger, you can make it the bigger screen, say, and the whatnot. Because that's
throw a little bit more RAM at it if you need to, and a bigger hard drive size, like Joe was talking about. That sort of meets people in the middle. Now we don't really have anything. We've got this really heavy-duty machine that you can spend $2,000 for, or you can spend $1,200.
It does feel to me like, I see what you're saying, though, because it does feel to me like there's people who just want the bigger screen.
Yeah.
15-inch MacBook Air. That's
Right.
what I'd like. I'd probably order that and replace my 13-inch Pro.
Right. It could be, if it could be lighter, but you don't need the processing power. You don't need 8 terabytes of storage, which is amazingly expensive.
Well, I think, Jerry, it's an interesting question. Like, did they go too high end with these machines? Are they overreaching, like you said? I mean, it's kind of the classic question of Apple, where you're looking at a new computer in the generic sense, and you're comparing, Apple to Dell or something back in the day. The idea back then was like Apple doesn't compete on the low end. There's no entry level cheap Mac, that competes with all the cheap PC options that are out there. They start at the higher level, higher price point, but really higher quality, higher spec, and all that. Lasts longer. Total cost of ownership, if you compare that, maybe it's a favorable comparison for Apple, back in the day. And now they've just extended the high end even beyond that. But at the same time, they've also kept the low end entry level pricing for some of this stuff. I mean, a MacBook, what does an M1 MacBook Air go for? Offhand, I'm looking it up right now.
$999, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Under $1,000, exactly. And you can find them at Best Buy right now for $100 off. You're getting a Mac for $900. It's current, top of the line, just incredible performance for a decent price, because it's a machine that's likely going to last for years to come. They're in a really good position where they have something at the entry level price point that's also really raised the bar quite a bit in performance. And I think, if anything, the mistake, if you want to look at it that way, is that the low end machines are too good. If my machine were slower, if it didn't have a 2 terabyte option, or topped out at 8 gigs of RAM or something, I probably would have to go to a 14. This machine is great for me. It's really fast. I think that Apple's really pushing the bar. And I think that what happens in technology is when the hardware has processor cycles to spare, so to speak, or like when the hardware is capable, the software will fill in that vacuum pretty quickly. And people are going to be pushing the limits. I think software is going to get better and better and more demanding. And I think that you'll be able to compete in the realm of Apple, but I think that they're going to leave the rest of the industry behind with a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't know how anybody could consider carrying any kind of competing Windows PC right now with the kind of battery life trade-offs that it comes with, the kind of performance trade-offs and so on, when you could carry this MacBook Air, MacBook Pro. What is the battery life? 20-something hours?
17 to 20. Yeah. So I will say there's one thing that we're not taking into account, which has changed, obviously, with the switch from the Intel to M1, which is virtualization. So there were people who were buying MacBooks and then virtualizing Windows on them as a major part of their workflow, or even potentially their core stuff. And, we have Parallels Desktop 17 and Windows 11 for ARM Insider Preview, and talk about names that go on forever. Microsoft has said it's not officially supported, and it works, there's no question. But if that was a major part of your concern, you have some Windows app which is just mission critical, and you were happy virtualizing it before, now I think you have some question.
The ARM version of Windows, while it can run, it can't run most Windows software, right?
I think it actually can, because it emulates it. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is it emulates the Intel side. I proved that it works. I did a very short piece about this in TidBITS. Someone was asking for a recommendation. I was like, I just can't tell you how well it works. I can say that it does work, but I only need to run one Windows app, which is this horribly crufty track meet management software, which looks like it was programmed in the 90s, because it was. and it runs just fine. I can't extrapolate from that to what general people would want to do in Windows. And that's part of it, is like, who knows what, particularly with custom apps, like if you've got this internal app that does this one thing that you need, who knows whether that's going to work until you test it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think virtualization as a service will fill in the gap, and you'll just be able to,
good point.
Have an app on your Macs and your iPhone and tunnel into some remote terminal somewhere in the cloud, and that'll work for most cases. I guess the one exception would be like anything hardware related, if you need something plugged into your physical machine, but that's already kind of a multiple layers now of emulation and hardware and stuff. So that was possible with an Intel, running Windows natively, and especially if you could just reboot into Windows, then your hardware would probably work. We're in a different world, and I think that's a pretty niche situation. I guess those people probably have to buy a Windows machine if they need something like that.
Right. The one that I get harassed about on a weekly basis by my son, who's doing a PhD in computer vision at Simon Fraser University, is if you're doing machine learning stuff, you in the academia anyway, you're working in NVIDIA GPUs and CUDA. Macs are simply not helpful. All the tools are built to work on NVIDIA GPUs. And so anything else just isn't a non-starter. It's killing him because, he would like to be able to do all this stuff on a Mac. And, I keep sending him like, oh, look, the M1 Mac says, you could have 32 GPUs. Right. He's like, yeah, but I can't do anything with them. There's obviously these specific ones. But overall, I think you're right that these high-end machines, they're absolutely great for the people who know they need them. But boy, if you don't, you're going to do just fine with an M1 for now. And it will be interesting to see if Apple and or independent companies come up with software which is so cool and does things that anyone could use, but requires that level of processing power to accomplish them. Yeah, that's what we haven't really seen so far. It's like, well, now that you can do this, now that we can throw, so much power at this task, suddenly something becomes possible that was never possible before for everyone. And I don't know what that is, but who knows? Even something as simple as Face ID, right? Face ID on the Mac. Some of that's processing. And, I'm sure that any of these machines could do it, but why aren't we seeing that kind of stuff going on in the Mac where it's taking advantage of the processor capabilities just to provide core capabilities that were never before conceivable?
Yeah, what's the machine learning / augmented reality version of Minecraft? Something like a killer app that would require M1 Pro and above or something.
Right.
That
the target audience is 13-year-old boys.
Right. Yeah. Right. There'll be something. That's how you hook people into this world. I mean, that's how I got started in this whole industry. Really, is like old style computer programming and HyperCard and whatnot, and just having fun with it, and that for me was like the killer app. I would never use any other platform because HyperCard was a Mac thing.
And actually, as I said, the 13-year-old boys, that's actually the other answer potentially, which is gaming.
Right.
So that if the gaming becomes so good on the Mac that all the studios really have to do full-on Mac games, or maybe even using a multiplayer game from a Mac is a much better experience, because let's face it, gamers will spend anything.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And there's a problem with the gaming on these new MacBook Pros, from what I understand. I just casually heard the conversation, and until Apple actually writes something that's an epic app, it's not going to light a fire in the gaming community to move over.
Right.
They burned their bridge, right, with the
Epic lawsuit.
To be fair, Epic kind of bombed the bridge, and then Apple obliterated the rest of it.
Right. And so gamers are not very excited about these MacBook Pros.
Speaking as the father of an almost 13-year-old boy, it's been tough because I have him on his 2017 MacBook Air playing games with his friends who have these souped up Windows computers, and he's just like, why do I have to be stuck with this thing? And I'm like, because you're using a Mac, damn it. But I might have to give in at some point soon, I think.
No son of mine is going to use a Windows machine.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you probably know more about this, but I do understand that actually in some of these games, your hardware puts you at a disadvantage.
It does. Yeah, he loves to use the word lagging.
Yeah, and rolling his eyes, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I can always say, I saw that, even though I'm turned away.
But it is nonetheless, you want to talk about the may you live in interesting times. I'm finding this more interesting than we've had Apple hardware in a long time. Finally, again, we're like, oh, wow, I wonder who this is good for and what's going to be the use and all that. It's not just the latest Intel chip is 5% faster than the last one. And it's named after some new lake. I never understood the lakes.
Right. I do agree. There's been a lot of chatter around these models, and also at the same time as we're having this discussion, struggling to try and answer them properly, to have knowledge on answering them as, hey, I bought this M1, now should I get this M1 Pro? And as you're saying, I mean, there are a lot of, and Joe mentioned it as well, there are specific use cases that seem to be for those processor needs. So I think we can safely tell some of our customers, you don't need to go this route if you don't have to.
Yeah.
But it is challenging us to be very aware, hyper aware of all the minor differences between all of them, and to be able to give good advice to our customers when they ask.
Yeah. One of the things that I found fascinating is having to explain chip binning repeatedly, because these weird GPU configurations, where it's 7 versus 8, or 16 versus 14 versus 16, or 24 versus 32. What's going on? And it's just something we've never dealt with in the Apple world before. But those are just chips that didn't pass testing fully. And so Apple turned off some GPUs, or 10-core versus 8-core CPU, turned off 2 CPUs cores. It's kind of a cool thing in some ways, that it's much more efficient use of the chips for the yield. If you're not used to it, it does make for an interesting, why do they have a 14 GPU one? And does that matter with the 16 GPU one?
It's pretty remarkable where they're at. I mean, not only is it more efficient to be able to take a slightly dysfunctional chip and just turn off one of the cores and sell it in a slightly slower machine, but they're also using the same processor across desktop, laptop, and mobile devices. I mean, that is incredible. I'm really impressed with them with the current lineup of the hardware. And not to get into it, but the Monterey rollout was pretty decent too. I have to say, I had my first Monterey machine remotely setting up a client, doing a migration. The first two, actually, yesterday and today. This is 1 week post Monterey release, and the hardware is already shipping with Monterey. The migrations worked. I mean, I know that's not saying that much, but it's saying enough, compared to some past experience with 0.0 releases and migration assistant issues and things like that. So I'm very impressed with their hardware and their software, and just not that you get stock recommendations here, but Apple seems to be doing all the right things right now, and they seem to be pretty untouchable.
So with Monterey, I'm hearing sort of two sides of something of the coin. The good side of the coin is people suggesting that Monterey is a little bit of a talk release of TikTok. Mm-hmm. So in essence, it's more of a refinement release. They didn't try to do huge things the way they did in Big Sur.
Snow Big Sur.
Yeah. There has been the suggestion that Monterey might be an easier decision to upgrade to sooner from that respect.
Yeah, I'm hearing that from colleagues too. It seems like more of our colleagues are kind of on that bandwagon of let's upgrade sooner than later. We went through a couple of more difficult, I think, processes with the file system transition and things like that. We're in a
Catalina. Yeah,
exactly. And so we're in a much better position now, and that tends to make sense. And so far, so good. But yeah, I'll wait and see. Right. I think a couple months.
So the flip side of that is I'm hearing non-trivial numbers of problems with people upgrading from Mojave on old Macs.
Yeah.
that jump seems to be a problem, and it's unclear quite why.
There's actually, I don't know if this is the issue you're talking about, but this happened to me a few times going back several months, and then this came up. I don't know why this kind of blew up more recently among colleagues, but several of the Mac admins in the Mac admin Slack worked with Apple engineers and coordinated amongst themselves and really dug into this issue. And it appears there was a specific folder was related to the MD worker process. And if it had more than a certain number of files in it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I've heard about this.
Yeah,
and it also tends to kill Time Machine. It just overwhelms Time Machine's memory.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, that could certainly have that effect as well. I think in this case, it was preventing machines from upgrading successfully. So we had a few users brick machines and bring them to us, and we had to basically recover data and then nuke and pave. And then we developed a process that was a workaround. But this was published. I think the easiest reference is on MrMacintosh.com.
Right.
Where he wrote up a blog about it with the commands to run to basically assess whether a given Mac will fall prey to this issue if you go to upgrade to, at that time it was Big Sur. I'm not sure if Monterey is also susceptible to this, and then also what to do to solve it, if it does happen. So it's a great post on MrMacintosh.com, thanks to the Mac admins that contributed to the solution along with Apple engineers. But that is helpful if you're considering upgrading some of these older machines. But of course, hardware is a consideration too. Just because it will run doesn't mean it's necessarily a great idea on some of this older hardware.
Yeah, that's one of those tricky ones because you never quite know, because sometimes Apple just makes things more efficient. Sometimes the new operating systems don't get slower.
Yeah.
And so, right, because there are the people who are just like, oh, I don't need to upgrade. Well, actually, you might benefit from it. Literally just in simple stuff, and so it's never quite clear. But
well, especially in this modern era of most current hardware has SSDs, or at least more than ever. I'm pretty confident if you have an SSD and you're not memory constrained, then you're probably okay for the most part. I guess there are software considerations now too, which who knew? I mean, we've never had like an upgrade from Apple that I can remember that would result in bricking some machines failing like that. It was pretty bad. So, I mean, that's a whole other topic we could probably get into after we have more experience with Monterey. But I think we're at the time now in the show where we should wrap up. And thank you, Adam, for coming on. Any final parting words to our listeners? Anything to look forward to on TidBITS Content Network coming out in the next month or two?
Yeah, I said I just pushed stuff out. I mean, actually, we're talking about the supply chain things. I just did a simple like Apple gift guide this year because, you might want to be publishing that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, that's a great, very topical thing. And
that was a terrific addition to this month's TidBITS Content Network. I pushed out my newsletter this morning. I usually pick 3 gems, or 3 at least I think that'll work with my profile, and that was one of them about the gift guide.
Yeah, there is a lot of this stuff where just sort of you have to kind of be aware, and I'm trying to I try not to push the Monterey stuff right away because I know, and even say I'm still recommending, hold off for a little bit. It's not, you don't need to jump instantly. But that said, like the iOS 15 and iPadOS 15 stuff, those are pretty good. I'm like, yeah, go for it. Those are, I'm not really seeing a problem. And then, of course, Apple's doing stuff like pulling the Safari 15 interface changes. So,
right.
Safari 15.1 changes the tab interface again, but back to where it was in 14. So, hey, I guess that's good. So it's a lot of trying to help people stay on top of, what's new, what's cool, and pass that on to users. Because like with Safari, if you're just a normal user, this app has just changed twice on you.
Yeah.
Like you upgraded from 14, and this is happening even in Big Sur and Catalina, right? This is not Monterey. So, this app has just changed. And this is something I just ran into. Someone on a Nextdoor site, the neighborhood site, posted something where they said, I found this cat collar with this thing on it, and it says it's from Apple. Yeah, that's an Apple AirTag, and here's how Apple says to you. This guy didn't even think to look up how to do it. He just like, I'll post on Nextdoor. And when I explained what it was and everything, he's like, oh, that's why my phone made a noise when I put it near it. What I took away from that is this guy's not techie. He was perfectly happy to just like, this weird thing happened and ignore it. Whereas if you're a technical person, you're like, I wonder what happened. I wonder what this is. I wonder. That level of curiosity doesn't necessarily spread across, or I think it absolutely doesn't spread across the user base. And so as consultants, it's sort of helpful for us to be able to say, hey, Safari just changed again. We're sorry, it's not our fault, but we want you to know why things look different for the second time in a month.
Yeah.
Right.
As a non-technical user, that's the sand shifting under your feet, and that makes you hesitant about technology.
Yeah, I have some of the opposite users who are all too interested in change for the sake of change. They just want the new thing. And I'm like, just wait a minute. Like, I need to try it first, please, and they just want the latest and greatest and just for the sake of newness. But, most of my users are probably on the other side, the non-technical side. And I had a client buy a new iMac and I, migrated her to it and she got all up and running and was good to go. And then called me back saying, there's some problems in Safari. It's like different colors and I don't know what's wrong. I think there's a problem with the computer. The screen, blah, blah, blah. And I get on there. I'm like, oh, this is just Safari now. Like you just, this tab is now going to look like your whole window is going to look like the color of this website. I don't know why. Like, it's just weird. It's not your computer, And so a lot of times they do assume the worst. Like, did I get hacked? Is there something wrong with the screen? And so the non-technical users definitely don't handle change very well. So I think that's a really good warning to say, let these changes settle in before we recommend this to everybody. But luckily, I'm waiting for the day when like the next iOS version is not a good thing because people just end up installing it and there's a lot of them are set to auto update. So some of them just get it whether they like it or not.
And to be fair, Apple, at least with this one, allows you to make the decision not to upgrade 14 to 15, which is great. And then they push out this, quiet 14.8.1, which was just like, oh, right, that came out the next day after 15.1, and it's just security updates, one of which is exploded in the wild. Great. And so go install that, please.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it is nice that they're doing that, treating it more like the Mac, where they're still supporting, the -1 version, and who knows if they'll start doing prior to that. Probably not, but not on iOS.
I'd be surprised. The only question is iOS 12, and if we'll see another one for that, because there are still totally current devices, devices that are still running that cannot upgrade even to past 12.
Oh, interesting.
So that's why we saw a couple of iOS 12 security updates in the last, or 12 point, I forget, 5.5 or whatever they were, that were just security updates for, this is bad, and people still use it. And if you were on 13, tough noogies, because that was just, you go to 14. Now you go to 15, except for the fact they now are allowing you to stay at 14.
14.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that is nice, and probably good for the enterprise as well, for people with certain requirements and apps and things. But
I agree.
Yeah. Well, this is great, Adam. It's always great to have you on the show to talk about this stuff live and to help us, think all this stuff through. And, for listeners that can't have a one-on-one conversation with you like we get to do, they should check out TidBITS Content Network, tcn.tidbits.com, for all this great content distilled into a form you can just use, you can send to your clients and inform them and make yourself look really smart and sound really smart by sending out this stuff that's written by, we won't tell anyone, it's written by Adam Engst. So thank you, Adam, for being on the show once again on Command Control Power.
You're very welcome. I had a great time. Thanks.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. Right now. My Mac is slow. Have you tried restarting? Well, the fans won't blow. Have you tried restarting? But my data is gone. Have you tried restarting? I dropped it in the pond.